Phoenix touched down at Bagram as the base transformed around her with the efficiency that marked elite military units shifting into combat mode. Security barriers rose from concealed positions, hidden weapon systems emerged from camouflaged installations, and personnel who had appeared to be conducting routine operations suddenly revealed themselves as carefully positioned combat assets. "Phoenix, report to the command center immediately." Harrison's voice crackled through her helmet radio as she completed post-flight checks. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos as dozens of specialists coordinated the most complex defensive operation in Bagram's history. Multiple screens showed satellite feeds, thermal imaging, and real-time intelligence updates painting a picture of enemy movement that confirmed Phoenix's worst fears. "Captain, your analysis was correct," General Morrison announced as Phoenix entered the secure briefing area. "We have confirmed movement of at least 12 vehicles, approximately 60 personnel, moving into positions that would allow coordinated attacks on multiple sectors of our perimeter." Phoenix studied the tactical displays, noting how Scorpion's positioning matched her psychological profile almost perfectly. "Ma'am, he's not planning random attacks. This is a coordinated assault designed to exploit the vulnerabilities we've been advertising." "Which means our trap is working," Harrison observed. "The question now is whether we can close it before Scorpion realizes what he's walked into." "Sir, based on his approach patterns, I estimate 6 to 8 hours before he's in final assault positions. That gives us time to ensure all our defensive assets are properly coordinated." General Morrison nodded grimly. "Captain, you've brought us this far with your analysis. What's your recommendation for the final phase?" Phoenix felt the weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. "Ma'am, we let him get close. Close enough to commit fully, close enough that he can't withdraw when he realizes it's a trap. Then we hit him with everything we have." "That's a significant risk." "Yes, ma'am, but it's the only way to ensure we get all of his assets, not just the ones we can see. Scorpion has survived 18 months by being cautious and maintaining escape routes. We have to eliminate those options." The next 6 hours passed in a haze of final preparations and position adjustments. Phoenix found herself coordinating air assets, while ground commanders positioned their forces in concealed defensive positions. The base maintained its appearance of routine operations, while actually transforming into the most sophisticated kill zone in military history. As darkness fell over the Afghan mountains, thermal imaging began picking up increased movement in the hills surrounding Bagram. Scorpion's forces were moving into final assault positions, with the confidence of an operation that had been planned down to the smallest detail. "Contact," reported the perimeter surveillance team at 22:47 hours. "Multiple thermal signatures approaching Sector 7. Count approximately 15 personnel, moving in tactical formation." Phoenix monitored the reports from her position in the command center, watching as Scorpion's assault developed exactly as her analysis had predicted. Multiple simultaneous approaches, designed to overwhelm defensive responses and exploit the apparent vulnerabilities they'd so carefully crafted. Additional contacts, Sector 4, estimated 20 personnel with heavy weapons. Sector 12 showing movement, vehicle-borne approach, unknown personnel count. The reports continued as Scorpion's forces moved into position around Bagram's perimeter. Phoenix felt a cold satisfaction as the trap closed with mechanical precision. Every enemy movement tracked, every approach vector covered by concealed defensive assets. All stations, Harrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Scorpion's forces are in position. Wait for my command before engaging. We need them fully committed." Phoenix held her breath as enemy forces completed their final approach. Through thermal imaging and night vision systems, they could see Scorpion's assault teams preparing for what they believed would be a surprise attack on a vulnerable American base. Instead, they were about to discover that they'd walked into the most perfectly orchestrated ambush in special operations history. "Contact front," came the first report as Scorpion's forces began their assault. "Enemy personnel breaching perimeter Sector 7. Sector 4 under attack. Heavy weapons fire confirmed. Vehicle-borne assault Sector 12. Multiple explosions." Phoenix watched the tactical display as Scorpion's coordinated attack unfolded with textbook precision. His forces had studied American defensive patterns for 18 months, and they were exploiting every apparent weakness with surgical accuracy. But what they didn't know was that every weakness was actually a carefully prepared kill zone, and every successful breach was drawing them deeper into a trap that had been 18 months in the making. "All defensive assets," Harrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had made him legendary in special operations circles. "Engage. Repeat, engage all targets." Bagram erupted in controlled violence as hidden defensive positions revealed themselves in coordinated devastation. Machine gun nests emerged from concealed positions, mortar teams acquired predetermined targets, and Apache helicopters rose from concealed positions like avenging angels bringing death from above. Phoenix strapped herself into her Apache as the aircraft lifted off, joining 3 other gunships in the coordinated destruction of Scorpion's assault force. Through her targeting system, she could see enemy forces trapped in kill zones they had walked into voluntarily, believing they were exploiting American weaknesses. Phoenix target Sector 7, multiple personnel in the open. Phoenix's 30 chain gun spoke with mechanical precision, eliminating enemy forces with the clinical efficiency that had earned her reputation. But even as she engaged targets, part of her mind was analyzing the larger tactical picture. This was too easy. Scorpion had survived 18 months by being cautious, paranoid, and always maintaining escape routes. The assault forces she was destroying were competent but not exceptional, certainly not the elite operatives she would have expected from someone of Scorpion's reputation. "Control, Phoenix," she transmitted while engaging a heavy weapons position. "Something's wrong. This doesn't match Scorpion's operational pattern." Phoenix explained while engaging. Phoenix destroyed another enemy position while her mind raced through tactical possibilities. "Sir, Scorpion never commits all his assets to a single operation. He always maintains reserve forces and escape routes. These assault teams are too exposed, too committed." The realization hit her like physical blow. "Control, Phoenix. This isn't the main attack, it's a diversion." Harrison's voice came back immediately, tight with understanding. "Phoenix, explain." "Sir, Scorpion studied our defensive patterns for 18 months. He knows we would position assets to defend against this kind of coordinated assault. While we're focused on stopping his forces here, his real assault team is hitting a different target." "What target?" Phoenix's blood turned to ice as the implications became clear. "Sir, he's not trying to destroy Bagram. He's trying to capture it. The real assault team is going after the command center while we're distracted fighting his sacrificial forces." The tactical display updated as intelligence assets confirmed Phoenix's worst fears. A small team of highly trained operatives had infiltrated Bagram's central complex during the coordinated assault, moving toward the command center with the precision that marked Scorpion's personal involvement. "All available assets to command center defense," Harrison ordered. "Phoenix, you're our closest air support. Get here now." Phoenix banked hard toward Bagram's central complex, pushing her Apache beyond safe operational limits as she raced to stop an infiltration that could decapitate American command authority in Afghanistan. Through her targeting system, she could see muzzle flashes erupting around the command center as Scorpion's real assault force engaged security personnel who had been positioned to defend against external attack, not internal infiltration. "Control, Phoenix inbound for close air support. Clear all friendly personnel from command center vicinity. Negative Phoenix. We have personnel trapped in the building. Danger close operations only. Phoenix felt her training take over as she transitioned to the most demanding form of combat, flying close air support in an urban environment with friendly forces in immediate danger. One miscalculation would kill the people she was trying to save, but hesitation would guarantee their deaths at Scorpion's hands. Control, Phoenix beginning danger close engagement. Mark friendly positions. The battle for Bagram's command center became a deadly ballet of precision flying and surgical weapons employment. Phoenix maneuvered her Apache between buildings with clearances measured in feet, using her aircraft's advanced targeting systems to distinguish between friendly and enemy forces in a firefight that was consuming the heart of American operations in Afghanistan. Through her thermal imaging, she could see Scorpion's assault team moving through the command center with the professionalism that marked Special Operations Forces. These weren't the desperate fighters she'd been engaging at the perimeter. These were elite operatives executing a mission they'd trained for extensively. And somewhere among them was Scorpion himself, the ghost who had been killing Americans for 18 months and was now within reach of achieving his greatest victory. Phoenix lined up her targeting system on an enemy position, her finger hovering over the trigger as she prepared to begin the most important engagement of her career. The hunt that had begun with 14 SEALs trapped in a mountain ambush was about to end in the heart of America's most important military installation in Afghanistan. But first, she had to ensure that when it ended, it would be Scorpion who paid the final price. Phoenix's first shot eliminated an enemy sniper who had been covering Scorpion's approach to the command center. The third round impacted with surgical precision, neutralizing the threat without damaging the critical communications equipment housed in the building behind him. "Good shot, Phoenix," Harrison's voice crackled through her headset. "Enemy sniper neutralized. We're still pinned down by heavy fire from the main entrance." Phoenix maneuvered her Apache around the command center complex, using buildings as cover while seeking angles of attack that would eliminate enemy forces without endangering friendly personnel. Through her targeting system, she could see the tactical situation developing in real time. Scorpion's forces had achieved partial penetration of the building, but were being held at critical choke points by security personnel who refused to yield ground. "Control, Phoenix. I have visual on enemy forces attempting to breach the main command room, requesting permission to engage with precision munitions." Phoenix negative. Too close to critical personnel and equipment. Use gun only. The 30 chain gun required closer range, but offered the precision Phoenix needed for danger close operations. She brought the Apache into a hover 50 meters from the building, close enough to see individual enemy fighters through her targeting optics. The first burst eliminated 2 enemy operatives who had been preparing to breach the command room with explosives. Phoenix adjusted her aim and fired again, this shot taking out a heavy weapons position that had been suppressing friendly forces in the corridor beyond. But as she engaged the visible targets, Phoenix realized that Scorpion himself was nowhere to be seen in her targeting display. The mastermind who had orchestrated 18 months of perfect operations was letting his subordinates absorb American firepower, while he pursued his primary objective through a route she hadn't anticipated. "Control, Phoenix. I don't have eyes on Scorpion. He's not with the main assault force." "Phoenix, all enemy personnel are accounted for in your sector." "Negative, sir. Scorpion is somewhere else in the building. He's using his assault team as a distraction while he goes after his real target." Phoenix pulled her Apache back from the building, switching to wide-area thermal surveillance as she searched for the missing terrorist. Scorpion hadn't survived 18 months by fighting when others could die in his place. He would be moving toward his objective, while American forces were focused on his expendable operatives. The thermal signature appeared on her display like a ghost materializing from shadow. A single individual moving through the building's lower level, avoiding the main battle while advancing toward a section of the complex that housed Bagram's most sensitive intelligence assets. Control, Phoenix. I have Scorpion. Single individual moving through basement level toward Intel section. He's not trying to destroy the command center, he's trying to steal our intelligence database. The implications hit Harrison immediately. Phoenix, if Scorpion gets access to our intelligence files, he'll have the names and locations of every asset, every operation, every classified program in the Afghan theater. Roger that, sir, moving to intercept. But Phoenix quickly realized the tactical challenge she faced. Scorpion was inside the building, protected by concrete and steel that her weapons couldn't penetrate without causing catastrophic damage to the intelligence he was trying to steal, and the friendly personnel still fighting elsewhere in the building. Control, I can't engage Scorpion without bringing down the building, requesting ground support to intercept. Phoenix, all ground assets are engaged with the perimeter assault. You're our only available resource. Phoenix stared at the thermal signature, moving steadily toward America's most classified intelligence, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her like a physical force. She could destroy the building and eliminate Scorpion, but that would also eliminate the intelligence he was trying to steal and kill unknown numbers of American personnel still inside. Or she could watch helplessly as the ghost who had been killing Americans for 18 months achieved his greatest victory. Control, Phoenix requesting permission to land and engage on foot. The radio was silent for long seconds before Harrison's voice returned, tight with the authority of a commander making decisions that would haunt him regardless of outcome. Phoenix, you are not trained for ground combat operations. Maintain aerial position. But Phoenix was already bringing her Apache down toward the command center's landing pad, her mind made up despite official orders. Sir, with respect, those are Americans in that building, and I'm not going to watch them die because we couldn't adapt to changing tactical requirements. She landed the Apache with the precision that had defined her career, shutting down systems and grabbing her personal weapons in movements that had been drilled into muscle memory through years of training. The M4 carbine felt unfamiliar in her hands after so many years of fighting from aircraft, but the fundamentals of marksmanship transcended the platform. Phoenix, you are ordered to return to your aircraft immediately. Phoenix keyed her radio one last time as she moved toward the building where Scorpion was closing in on his objective. Sorry, sir, but some orders are more important than others. Phoenix going dark. She switched off her radio and advanced toward the building where the most important firefight of her career was about to begin. Somewhere in the basement levels, Scorpion was minutes away from accessing intelligence that could destroy American operations throughout Afghanistan. Phoenix had spent her career being underestimated because of her gender, her size, and her soft Southern accent. But she'd also spent that career proving that warfare wasn't about physical strength or aggressive posturing. It was about intelligent application of violence at the decisive point. And right now, she was the only thing standing between Scorpion and the intelligence coup that would make him the most dangerous terrorist in the world. Phoenix entered the building through a service entrance that had been left unsecured during the confusion of battle. The corridors were filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder, but her training kicked in as she moved toward the basement levels where Scorpion was pursuing his mission. The intelligence section was 3 levels down, protected by multiple layers of security that should have been impossible for any intruder to penetrate. But Scorpion had spent 18 months studying American procedures, and his psychological profile suggested he was exactly the kind of operator who could turn that knowledge into tactical advantage. Phoenix descended through the building's service passages, using routes that avoided the main firefight while bringing her closer to Scorpion's likely position. Her M4 carbine was ready, safety off, finger resting lightly on the trigger as she moved through terrain she'd never trained for. The first indication that she was on the right track came from the security systems themselves. Electronic locks that should have been impenetrable showed signs of sophisticated bypass, the kind of technical expertise that marked special operations training. Scorpion wasn't just a killer. He was a professional with skills that matched or exceeded most American operators. Phoenix found the first body on the second basement level. A security guard who had been eliminated with clinical precision, killed silently and efficiently by someone who understood exactly how to neutralize threats without alerting other personnel. The wound patterns suggested close-quarters combat training at the highest levels. She was hunting someone who was at least her equal in every measure that mattered. Phoenix reached the intelligence section's outer perimeter and found systematic evidence of Scorpion's infiltration. Security cameras had been disabled, alarm systems bypassed, and defensive positions neutralized with the kind of professional expertise that spoke of extensive mission planning. But as she studied the infiltration pattern, Phoenix realized something that chilled her to the bone. Scorpion wasn't just stealing intelligence, he was planting something. The tactical geometry of his movement suggested he was installing equipment, not just accessing files. He wasn't planning to steal American intelligence. He was planning to compromise it permanently, creating a backdoor that would give him access to classified information for years to come. Phoenix keyed her backup radio, hopping to reach Harrison despite the building's interference with communications. Control, Phoenix. Scorpion isn't conducting intelligence theft, he's installing persistent access. This is a long-term intelligence penetration. Static answered her, the building's construction blocking her transmission. Phoenix realized she was truly alone, cut off from support, facing an enemy who had spent 18 months preparing for exactly this confrontation. She advanced toward the intelligence section's central server room, knowing that Scorpion would have to physically access the main systems to install whatever backdoor he was planning. The corridors grew quieter as she moved deeper into the building. The sounds of the main battle fading to the radio crackled at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through silk. In the operations center of Forward Operating Base Kestrel, nestled deep in the unforgiving mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ironside Kellerman stared at the tactical display with the expression of a man watching his worst nightmare unfold in real time. 14 green dots representing his SEAL team had gone dark in Sector 7. No movement, no communication, just silence where there should have been the steady heartbeat of operational chatter. "Sir, last confirmed position was grid reference 77 Alpha," Sergeant Major Williams reported, his voice betraying none of the tension that gripped the room like a vice. They were moving to intercept high-value target codenamed Scorpion when communication ceased. Kellerman's jaw tightened. Scorpion, the ghost who had been bleeding American forces dry for 18 months, a phantom who struck without warning and vanished like smoke. Intel suggested he was planning something catastrophic, something that would make the embassy bombings look like firecrackers. The mission was supposed to be routine, 14 of the Navy's finest against one man. Now those 14 were either dead or worse. "What assets do we have in theater?" Kellerman demanded, his eyes never leaving the screen where those motionless dots mocked him. "Apache gunships are 20 minutes out, but sir," Williams hesitated, "there's something else. We have one pilot already airborne on a training exercise. Call sign Phoenix. She's been requesting permission to provide reconnaissance for the past hour." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kellerman turned slowly, his weathered face a mask of barely controlled fury. "She, Sergeant Major, please tell me you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting." Outside, rotor blades cut through the mountain air with surgical precision. Captain Zara, Phoenix, Blackthorn banked her Apache helicopter hard left, the aircraft responding to her touch like an extension of her own body. She'd been listening to the radio chatter, reading between the lines of official communication protocols. 14 men down, a ghost in the mountains, and a commander too proud to admit he might need help from someone who didn't fit his narrow definition of a warrior. Phoenix had been here before, not geographically but emotionally. The doubt, the dismissal, the assumption that her 5'4" frame and soft Louisiana accent meant she couldn't handle what the mountain had to offer. They'd learn. They always did, but usually not before good men paid the price for their prejudice. The Apache's targeting system painted the landscape below in stark green and white, a digital canvas of death waiting to be written. Somewhere in those shadows, Scorpion was making his move, and somewhere else, 14 SEALs were running out of time. Phoenix keyed her radio one more time, her voice steady as stone despite the chaos brewing in her chest. "Control, this is Phoenix. I'm holding station at Grid 66 Bravo, ready to provide immediate air support on your command." The silence that followed spoke volumes. "Control, Phoenix. Repeat, ready to provide immediate close air support. Those men don't have all day." More silence. Then finally Kellerman's voice cut through the static like a rusty blade. "Phoenix, return to base immediately. This is not your concern." But Zara Blackthorn had spent too many years being told what wasn't her concern. She adjusted her grip on the collective, feeling the Apache's power thrumming through her bones. In the distance, she could see muzzle flashes painting the mountainside like deadly fireflies. The dance was about to begin, whether Commander Kellerman approved or not. Kellerman stared at the radio as if it had personally offended him. Around the operations center, technicians and intelligence officers exchanged glances that spoke of a history they all knew but rarely discussed. Phoenix's reputation preceded her like a shadow, brilliant pilot, surgical precision, and a stubborn streak wider than the Mississippi Delta. But she was also untested in this theater, untested against an enemy who had made killing Americans into an art form. "Sir," Williams ventured carefully, "Phoenix has more combat flight hours than any pilot in theater. Her record speaks for itself." "Her record," Kellerman replied with ice in his voice, "is flying milk runs in Iraq. This is different. This is Scorpion we're talking about." But even as he spoke, Kellerman felt the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 14 men. His men. The Apache gunships were still 18 minutes out, and in 18 minutes, Scorpion could vanish into the cave systems that honeycombed these mountains like Swiss cheese. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when lives hung in the balance. The tactical display updated, showing Phoenix's Apache holding station exactly where she'd reported. Steady, professional, waiting. In the background, another radio crackled to life, the emergency frequency. A weak, pain-filled voice cut through the static. Any station, this is Bravo 7 Alpha. We are pinned down by overwhelming hostile forces. Multiple casualties. Request immediate air support. Grid 77 Alpha. Repeat, we need help now." The voice belonged to Petty Officer Rodriguez, Kellerman realized. One of his best men, reduced to begging for salvation from whatever angel might be listening. The irony wasn't lost on him that the only angel currently available happened to be piloting an Apache helicopter and waiting for permission to engage. Kellerman closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, a luxury he rarely allowed himself. When he opened them, the weight of command had crystallized into something harder than diamond. "Phoenix, control. You are cleared to provide reconnaissance only. Do not engage without explicit authorization." "Copy that, control." Phoenix moving to reconnaissance position. The radio went quiet except for the static that always seemed to fill the spaces between words in a war zone. But everyone in the operations center could feel the shift in the air, the sense that something significant was about to unfold. They'd all heard stories about Phoenix, whispered tales that circulated through the ranks like urban legends. Most assumed they were exaggerated. They were about to learn otherwise. Phoenix pushed the Apache into a shallow dive, the mountain landscape rushing up to meet her with stark, unforgiving beauty. Through her helmet-mounted display, she could see the thermal signatures of the SEAL team clustered behind a rocky outcrop, pinned down by enemy fire from at least 3 different positions. Classic ambush formation, Scorpion wasn't just deadly, he was smart. Control, Phoenix. I have eyes on Bravo 7 Alpha. Count 14 friendly thermal signatures, all showing movement. Enemy positions identified at grid 77 Alpha 1, 77 Alpha 3, and 77 Bravo 2. Request permission to engage. Kellerman's voice came back tight with authority and something else, perhaps the first hint of respect. Negative, Phoenix. Reconnaissance only until backup arrives. But as Phoenix watched through her targeting system, one of the friendly thermal signatures went still. Then another. Scorpion wasn't content to wait for reinforcements. He was executing the SEALs one by one, taking his time, savoring each kill like a connoisseur sampling fine wine. Phoenix's finger hovered over the trigger, every instinct screaming at her to engage. Below her, American soldiers were dying while she watched from the sky like some impotent guardian angel. The Apache's 30 chain gun could end this nightmare in 30 seconds, but military protocol demanded she wait for permission that might never come. Control, Phoenix. Friendlies are taking casualties. I need to engage now. Negative, Phoenix. Hold position. Another thermal signature went cold. Then the radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice, weaker now, tinged with the desperation of a man watching his brothers die around him. Any station, any station. We are being overrun. Need immediate fire support or we're all dead. The mountains seemed to hold their breath, waiting for someone to make a decision that would echo through the valleys like thunder. In the operations center, Kellerman stood frozen between regulation and reality, between protocol and the lives of his men. And somewhere in the sky above Afghanistan, Captain Zara Blackthorne made a choice that would define not just this mission, but her entire career. She squeezed the trigger. The Apache's chain gun roared to life, sending a stream of 30 rounds into the first enemy position with surgical precision. The effect was immediate and devastating. What had been a coordinated ambush became chaos as Scorpion's men scrambled for cover that no longer existed. Phoenix banked hard right, lining up her next target with the cold professionalism that had earned her the call sign in the first place. Phoenix to control, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Engaging enemy positions. Sorry, sir, but I couldn't just watch them die. The silence from the operations center was deafening. Kellerman stared at the tactical display as Phoenix's Apache danced through the mountain air like a deadly ballet, each movement calculated to provide maximum protection for the SEALs below while delivering devastating firepower to their attackers. It was flying unlike anything he'd ever seen, not the brute force approach favored by most combat pilots, but something more subtle, more intelligent, more deadly. Control, Bravo 7 Alpha. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter, stronger now, filled with hope where before there had been only desperation. Unknown aircraft providing close air support. Enemy fire has ceased from Position 1. Say again, Position 1 is neutralized. Kellerman watched the tactical display update in real time as Phoenix eliminated the second enemy position with a precision Hellfire missile strike that left the surrounding terrain untouched. Professional, surgical, perfect. The kind of flying that took not just skill, but an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional warfare that couldn't be taught in any flight school. Sir, Williams whispered, his voice filled with something approaching awe, she's actually doing it. But Kellerman knew something Williams didn't, something that intelligence had been tracking for months. Scorpion never operated alone. He always had an ace up his sleeve, always had one more trap waiting to spring. And as Phoenix lined up her third and final target, that trap was about to be revealed. The shoulder-fired missile appeared on Phoenix's threat warning system like a digital harbinger of death, launched from a position that hadn't appeared on any of their reconnaissance sweeps. Scorpion's final gambit, a man with a Stinger missile, hidden in the rocks, waiting for exactly this moment when an American aircraft would be focused on ground targets and vulnerable to surface-to-air attack. Phoenix saw the missile launch and felt time slow to a crawl, the way it always did in moments when death reached out with intimate familiarity. The Stinger was state-of-the-art, heat-seeking, designed specifically to kill aircraft like the Apache. In normal circumstances, it would be a death sentence, but Zara Blackthorne had never been accused of being normal. She dove. The Apache plummeted toward the earth like a stone dropped from heaven, rotor blades screaming through the thin mountain air as Phoenix pushed the aircraft beyond its design limitations. Behind her, the Stinger missile adjusted course, its seeker head locked onto the Apache's hot exhaust signature. Physics said the missile would win. It was faster, more maneuverable, and designed for exactly this scenario. Physics, however, had never met Phoenix. At the last possible second, she pulled the Apache out of its dive and threw it into a barrel roll that should have torn the aircraft apart. Instead, the helicopter's rotor wash caught the missile in a vortex of superheated air and debris, confusing its guidance system just long enough for Phoenix to slip away like smoke on the wind. The Stinger impacted harmlessly into the mountainside, sending up a plume of rock and dust that painted the dawn sky in shades of gray and gold. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered in the operations center, the words carrying clearly over the open radio channel. But Phoenix wasn't finished. Even as she recovered from the dive, she was already acquiring the Stinger position with her targeting system. The man who had tried to kill her was still there, probably reloading for another shot. In the unforgiving mathematics of combat aviation, that made him a threat that needed to be eliminated. The 30 chain gun spoke once more, and Scorpion's final guardian vanished in a cloud of pulverized stone. "Control, Phoenix," came the calm voice over the radio, as if she'd just completed a routine training exercise rather than cheating death by margins measured in milliseconds. "All enemy positions neutralized. Bravo 7 Alpha is secure and ready for extraction." Kellerman found himself gripping the edge of the tactical display so hard his knuckles had gone white. Around him, the operations center had fallen into the kind of silence that follows miracles and disasters with equal measure. On the screen, Phoenix's Apache circled protectively over the SEAL team like a guardian angel with rotors and missiles. "Phoenix Control," he managed finally, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't possessed an hour earlier. "Outstanding work. Apache reinforcements are now 15 minutes out for escort duty." "Copy that, Control. Phoenix will maintain overwatch until relieved." The radio went quiet, leaving only the gentle hum of electronics and the sound of grown men trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Kellerman stared at the tactical display for a long moment, watching Phoenix's steady orbit pattern, each circuit precise and professional. No showboating, no unnecessary heroics, just a pilot doing her job with a competence that made his earlier skepticism feel like a physical weight in his chest. "Sergeant Major," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, sir." "I want Phoenix in my office the moment she lands. We need to have a conversation." Williams nodded, understanding passing between them without words. They'd all just witnessed something that would be talked about in ready rooms and command centers for years to come. The day a pilot they dismissed proved that warfare wasn't about gender or politics or preconceptions. It was about skill, courage, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated the living from the dead. High above the Afghan mountains, Captain Zara Blackthorne continued her orbit, professional and precise, watching over 14 men who owed their lives to a woman their commander had tried to keep on the sidelines. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she'd save the satisfaction for later. Right now, there were still lives to protect and a job to finish. Because that's what Phoenix did. She finished the job. The extraction went flawlessly, a textbook operation that stood in stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. The Apache gunships arrived exactly on schedule, taking over protective duties, while Phoenix guided the medical evacuation helicopters to the landing zone with the same precision she'd used to eliminate Scorpion's ambush. By 6:30 hours, all 14 SEALs were safely aboard the medevac birds, battered but alive. Kellerman watched it all from the operations center, studying Phoenix's every move through the tactical display and radio chatter. Her communication was crisp and professional, her flying textbook perfect. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. It was the kind of performance that spoke of years of training and natural talent refined into something approaching art. "Sir," Williams reported, "Phoenix is requesting permission to land." "Granted, and Sergeant Major, clear my schedule for the next hour." Phoenix brought the Apache down onto the landing pad with the delicacy of a leaf settling on still water. Even through the reinforced windows of the operations center, Kellerman could see the precision in every movement as she secured the aircraft and began her post-flight checks. Professional to the end. 20 minutes later, Captain Zara Blackthorne stood at attention in Kellerman's office, her flight suit still bearing the stains of combat and her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that couldn't quite hide the streak of premature gray at her left temple. A souvenir from a helicopter crash in Iraq that should have killed her, but had instead forged her into something harder than steel. Kellerman studied her for a long moment, taking in details he'd missed during their previous brief encounters. The calluses on her hands from thousands of hours on flight controls, the slight favoring of her left leg from injuries sustained in that crash, the eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. "At ease, Captain," he said finally. "Please sit down." Phoenix remained standing, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. "Sir, if this is about engaging without explicit authorization, I take full responsibility for my actions. The situation required immediate intervention." "Captain Blackthorne," Kellerman interrupted, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised them both, "you saved 14 lives today. The only thing I'm concerned about is how I failed to recognize your capabilities sooner." Something flickered in Phoenix's eyes, surprise perhaps, or the kind of cautious hope that came from too many years of being underestimated. She remained standing, but her posture softened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No," Kellerman replied, moving to stand beside the window that overlooked the landing pad where her Apache sat cooling in the morning sun. "What you did today went far beyond just doing your job. You read a tactical situation in real time, adapted to changing threats, and executed precision strikes under conditions that would have challenged our most experienced pilots. And you did it all while disobeying direct orders." Phoenix's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, I'm not criticizing, Captain. I'm apologizing." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge being built from honesty and humility. "I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment, and good men nearly died because of it. That won't happen again." For the first time since entering the office, Phoenix allowed herself to relax slightly. The rigid military bearing remained, but something human flickered beneath the surface. A woman who had spent years proving herself over and over again, only to have her competence questioned at every turn. "Sir, with respect, I've been dealing with preconceptions my entire career. What matters is that those men are going home to their families." Kellerman nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. "Tell me about the Stinger missile. How did you know it was coming?" "I didn't," Phoenix replied with characteristic honesty. "But Scorpion's pattern suggested he always kept an ace in reserve. When I eliminated the first two positions, logic dictated he'd have some kind of area denial weapon positioned to cover his retreat. The Stinger was the most likely option." "And the evasive maneuver?" A ghost of a smile touched the corners of Phoenix's mouth. Desperation, sir, and maybe a little bit of physics I learned the hard way in Iraq. Kellerman found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. Iraq, the crash that put you in the hospital for 3 months. 2 months and 3 weeks, sir, but who's counting? You were piloting a Black Hawk that took an RPG hit during a casualty evacuation. According to the report, you managed to auto-rotate the aircraft to a controlled crash landing while unconscious from blood loss. Phoenix's expression grew distant, her eyes focusing on something beyond the office walls. I remember bits and pieces, mostly just the sound of the rotor blades and knowing I had wounded Marines depending on me to get them home. All 12 Marines survived, 0 casualties from the crash landing. Yes, sir. That's when they gave you the call sign Phoenix, isn't it? Because you brought that helicopter back from the dead. Phoenix nodded slowly, the memory clearly still painful after all these years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that a bird named for resurrection was being flown by someone most people thought didn't belong in the cockpit in the first place. Kellerman leaned against his desk, studying this woman who had just redefined his understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. Captain, I have a proposition for you. Scorpion escaped today. We found blood at the 3rd position, but no body. Intelligence suggests he's planning something big, something that makes today's ambush look like a training exercise. I need pilots I can trust, pilots who can think on their feet and adapt to changing situations. Sir, I'm recommending you for attachment to Joint Special Operations Command. Your new assignment, should you accept it, would be hunting Scorpion and his network. Dangerous work, high-stakes missions, the kind of flying that doesn't make it into recruitment brochures. Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window where her Apache sat on the landing pad like a sleeping predator. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years spent proving herself in a world that had never been designed for people like her. Sir, I didn't come to Afghanistan to play it safe. If Scorpion is out there planning something that threatens American lives, then he needs to be stopped. I'm in. Kellerman extended his hand, and Phoenix shook it with a grip that spoke of strength earned through adversity. Welcome to the team, Phoenix. Something tells me this partnership is going to be very interesting. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and shadow. In the distance, barely visible through the morning haze, smoke still rose from the positions where Phoenix had written her first chapter in the war against Scorpion. It wouldn't be her last. 2 days later, Phoenix found herself in the briefing room at Bagram Air Base, surrounded by some of the most elite warriors in the American military. Green Berets, Delta Force operators, Navy SEALs, and Air Force pararescue specialists, men who had spent their careers operating in the shadows where conventional warfare met surgical precision. The fact that she was the only woman in the room wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Phoenix herself. Colonel James Nighthawk Harrison commanded this particular circus of lethal talent, and his reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. 15 years of special operations, from Somalia to Syria, with a kill count that was classified so high most people didn't have clearance to know it existed. He studied Phoenix with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. Captain Blackthorne, he began, his voice carrying the flat authority that came from years of life-and-death decision-making. Your performance 2 days ago has generated considerable interest at the highest levels. Before we proceed, I need to understand what we're working with. Phoenix remained at attention, her expression neutral despite the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her from every angle. Sir, I'm ready to serve in whatever capacity the mission requires. The mission, Harrison continued, advancing to the front of the briefing room where a large tactical display showed satellite imagery of the Hindu Kush mountain range, is unlike anything you've encountered before. Scorpion isn't just another high-value target. He's a ghost who has been systematically dismantling our operations in this region for 18 months. The display updated, showing a series of attack sites marked in red across the mountainous terrain. Convoy ambushes, forward operating base raids, helicopter shoot-downs, a pattern of violence that spoke of intimate knowledge of American tactics and procedures. Intelligence suggests Scorpion is former military, Harrison explained, his laser pointer tracing connections between attack sites. Possibly American-trained, definitely someone with access to our operational patterns. He's not just killing our people, he's studying us, learning from each engagement, evolving his tactics faster than we can adapt. Master Sergeant Reaper Kowalski, a Delta Force operator with shoulders like a linebacker and scars that told stories of a dozen classified operations, spoke up from the back of the room. "Sir, what makes this bird different from every other pilot who's taken a shot at Scorpion and ended up in a body bag?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Phoenix felt every eye in the room turn toward her. These men had earned their places at this table through blood and sacrifice, and she understood that her presence here was viewed as either a serious miscalculation or a dangerous experiment. "That's an excellent question, Master Sergeant," Harrison replied, his gaze never leaving Phoenix. "Captain, would you care to answer?" Phoenix took a breath, feeling the weight of her career balanced on the edge of a knife. "Sir, I can't promise I'm better than the pilots who came before me. What I can promise is that I approach problems differently. Scorpion has been successful because he thinks like a soldier, aggressive, direct, overwhelming force applied at the point of maximum vulnerability. But warfare isn't just about force. Sometimes it's about patience. Sometimes it's about being willing to wait for the perfect moment, rather than forcing an imperfect one." Kowalski leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Explain." "Scorpion uses the mountains like a fortress, sir. He knows we have superior firepower, so he forces us to fight on his terms, close quarters, limited maneuverability, terrain that favors defenders over attackers. Every pilot who's gone after him has tried to drag him out of those mountains with overwhelming force." "And your approach?" Phoenix moved to the tactical display, her finger tracing the pattern of Scorpion's attacks with the precision of someone who had studied them extensively. "I don't try to drag him out, sir. I wait for him to come to me. Scorpion is aggressive by nature, that's what's made him successful. But aggression is also a weakness if you know how to exploit it." The room had grown quiet, the kind of focused silence that accompanied moments of revelation. Harrison studied the display, following Phoenix's logic with the analytical mind that had kept him alive through 15 years of impossible missions. "You're talking about bait," he said finally. "Yes, sir. We make ourselves appear vulnerable, give Scorpion a target he can't resist, and when he commits to the attack, we spring the trap. It requires patience, precision, and the willingness to use ourselves as live bait, but it turns his greatest strength into his greatest weakness." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Viper Chen, the only other woman in the room and commander of the Air Force Special Operations Contingent, spoke for the first time. "That's assuming Scorpion takes the bait. What if he sees through the deception?" "Then we adapt, ma'am. Scorpion is smart, but he's also human. Humans have patterns, and patterns can be predicted. We study his methods, understand his psychology, and give him exactly what he expects to see until the moment we don't." Chen nodded slowly, approval flickering in her eyes. "Interesting approach. Risky but interesting." Kowalski crossed his arms, his expression skeptical but no longer dismissive. "All right, Captain. Assuming this plan of yours works, how do we execute it? Scorpion isn't going to walk into an obvious trap." Phoenix returned to her position at attention, but her voice carried the confidence of someone who had already thought through every angle. "We use his own success against him, sir. Scorpion has been targeting high-value convoys and isolated outposts. We create a target that's too valuable for him to ignore, something that appears vulnerable, but is actually the killing ground we choose. Harrison's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications. You're talking about using real assets as bait, real convoys, real soldiers, real risks. Yes, sir, but calculated risks, with multiple layers of protection and contingency plans. The bait has to be real or Scorpion won't bite, but that doesn't mean it has to be defenseless. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Phoenix and the tactical display, where Scorpion's pattern of attacks painted a picture of mounting American casualties. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Captain, you've got my attention. Let's see if you can turn theory into practice. We'll start with reconnaissance flights, get you familiar with Scorpion's area of operations. But understand this, if you're wrong about his patterns, if this psychology profile you're building turns out to be incorrect, people die. Good people. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Phoenix met his gaze without flinching. Sir, people are already dying. At least this way we're fighting back. Harrison smiled for the first time since the briefing began, a cold expression that held no warmth but considerable respect. Welcome to the hunt, Phoenix. Let's go catch ourselves a ghost. The briefing broke up with the efficient professionalism that marked elite military units, but Phoenix noticed the subtle shift in how the others regarded her. Still skeptical, still evaluating, but no longer dismissive. She'd bought herself a chance to prove her theories weren't just academic exercises. Now came the hard part, turning strategy into reality in an environment where mistakes were measured in body counts. The reconnaissance flights began the next morning, Phoenix taking her Apache through the mountain valleys where Scorpion had written his bloody signature across the landscape. Each sortie revealed new details about the terrain, the patterns of local traffic, the subtle indicators that separated routine mountain life from the preparation for an ambush. Flying these mountains required a different kind of skill than the desert operations Phoenix had mastered in Iraq. The terrain was unforgiving, with sudden weather changes that could turn a routine flight into a survival exercise. Thermal currents created by the mountain peaks made precision flying a constant challenge, and the thin air at altitude meant every maneuver had to be calculated with surgical precision. But Phoenix found herself oddly at home in this vertical world of stone and sky. The mountains demanded respect, but they also offered opportunities for a pilot willing to think in 3 dimensions. Natural concealment, thermal masking from the rock faces, and approach routes that conventional tactics would never consider. On her 3rd day of reconnaissance, she found it, Scorpion's signature carved into the landscape like a scar across the mountain face. A convoy ambush site from 6 weeks earlier, where 3 vehicles had been destroyed and 8 soldiers killed. The wreckage had been cleared, but the tactical geometry remained, telling the story of how Scorpion had turned a routine supply run into a killing field. Phoenix orbited the site slowly, her trained eye reading the landscape like a book written in blood and burned metal. The attack had come from 3 positions: high ground overlooking the road, flanking positions to prevent escape, and a blocking position that had cut off any hope of retreat. Textbook ambush tactics, executed with the precision that marked Scorpion's handiwork. But there was something else, something that hadn't appeared in any of the after-action reports she'd studied. A 4th position, carefully concealed among the rocks, that would have provided overwatch for the entire operation. Scorpion hadn't just planned for success, he'd planned for failure, positioning himself where he could observe American response tactics and adapt his future operations accordingly. "Control, Phoenix," she transmitted, keying her radio while maintaining her careful orbit of the ambush site. "Requesting permission to land and conduct detailed reconnaissance of Grid 74 Alpha." Harrison's voice came back immediately, carrying the authority that had made him legend in special operations circles. "Negative, Phoenix. Area is not secured for ground operations." "Sir, I've identified a previously unknown observation position. Scorpion has been studying our response patterns from a concealed overwatch. If we can access that position, we might be able to understand his selection criteria for future targets. There was a pause, the kind of silence that preceded decisions that could alter the course of entire operations. Phoenix, you are not authorized for ground reconnaissance. Return to base immediately. Phoenix felt frustration bubble up in her chest, but she forced her voice to remain professional. Copy that, Control. Phoenix returning to base. But as she banked away from the ambush site, her mind was already working through the implications of what she'd discovered. Scorpion wasn't just a killer. He was a student, constantly learning and adapting his methods based on American responses. Every reaction, every tactic, every procedure was being cataloged and analyzed for future exploitation. That night, Phoenix found herself in the base library, a cramped room filled with technical manuals and intelligence reports that served as the informal think tank for special operations planning. She spread satellite photos and tactical maps across a large table, building a comprehensive picture of Scorpion's operational pattern. Burning the midnight oil, Captain. Phoenix looked up to find Colonel Harrison standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Sir, just trying to understand how Scorpion selects his targets. Harrison entered the library and studied the materials Phoenix had assembled, finding anything interesting. Yes, sir. Look at this pattern. Phoenix pointed to a series of marks she'd made on the satellite photos. Every ambush site has excellent visibility of our likely response routes. Scorpion isn't just planning attacks, he's positioning himself to study our reaction patterns. That's a troubling observation. It gets worse, sir. If Scorpion has been cataloging our response procedures, he's not just planning random attacks. He's building towards something specific, something that requires detailed knowledge of how we operate under pressure. Harrison pulled up a chair, his interest clearly engaged. Explain your reasoning. Phoenix traced connections between attack sites with her finger, building a picture that grew more ominous with each revelation. Every target has been carefully chosen to elicit specific responses. Supply convoys force us to reveal convoy security procedures. Forward operating base raids make us show our defensive capabilities. Helicopter ambushes expose our air support protocols. You're suggesting this has all been preparation for a larger operation? Yes, sir. Scorpion has been conducting a systematic intelligence-gathering campaign disguised as random terrorist attacks. He's not trying to win through attrition. He's studying us so he can strike at something we can't afford to lose. Harrison leaned back in his chair, the implications of Phoenix's analysis clearly weighing on him. If you're right, Captain, then everything we know about Scorpion needs to be reevaluated. He's not just a terrorist, he's running a long-term strategic intelligence operation. Sir, I think that's exactly what he's doing, and I think I know what his real target is. I'm listening. Phoenix pulled out a different map, this one showing the broader regional picture with major installations marked in red. There's only one target in this theater that would require the kind of detailed operational intelligence Scorpion has been gathering, something so valuable that 18 months of preparation would be justified. Her finger came to rest on a single point marked with multiple security classifications. Bagram Air Base, sir. He's not planning to attack a convoy or a forward operating base. He's planning to hit the largest American installation in Afghanistan. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stared at the map, following Phoenix's logic to its terrifying conclusion. Bagram housed thousands of American personnel, billions of dollars in equipment, and served as the logistical hub for the entire Afghan operation. A successful attack on Bagram wouldn't just be a tactical victory, it would be a strategic catastrophe. Captain, if you're right about this, it changes everything. We're not hunting a terrorist anymore, We're trying to prevent the largest military disaster since the Tet Offensive." Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I need to brief the Joint Chiefs immediately. How confident are you in this analysis?" Phoenix met his gaze without hesitation. "Sir, given Scorpion's pattern of operations and the intelligence requirements for the targets he's been studying, I'd estimate 90% confidence. The only question is timing. How long do we have?" Based on the escalation pattern in his attacks and the seasonal weather windows for large-scale operations, I'd say weeks, not months, maybe less. Harrison nodded grimly. "Pack your gear, Captain. You're coming to Kabul with me. If Scorpion is planning what you think he's planning, we're going to need every advantage we can get." As Phoenix gathered her materials, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. If she was right, thousands of American lives hung in the balance. If she was wrong, resources would be diverted from other critical operations, and soldiers would die because of misallocated intelligence assets. But deep in her gut, where instinct lived alongside training and experience, she knew she wasn't wrong. Scorpion was out there in the mountains, planning something that would make his previous attacks look like training exercises. And somehow, she had become the person tasked with stopping him. The flight to Kabul took 3 hours through weather that challenged even Phoenix's considerable skills. Mountain turbulence tossed the transport helicopter around like a child's toy, but she used the time to refine her analysis, building contingency plans and operational scenarios that might give them an edge when Scorpion finally revealed his hand. The briefing at International Security Assistance Force headquarters was unlike anything Phoenix had experienced. Generals, intelligence chiefs, and special operations commanders from 6 different countries gathered around a secure conference table while she presented her analysis to some of the most powerful military minds in the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "Captain Blackthorne has identified what we believe to be Scorpion's actual strategic objective. Captain, brief them on your findings." Phoenix stood, feeling the eyes of history watching as she outlined a threat that could reshape the entire Afghan conflict. "Sirs, ma'ams, based on pattern analysis of Scorpion's operational history, I believe his ultimate target is Bagram Air Base itself." The reaction was immediate and intense. Voices raised in skeptical questions, demands for evidence, challenges to her methodology. Phoenix weathered it all with the composure that had carried her through years of being the only woman in rooms full of men who questioned her competence. General Patricia, Iron Lady, Morrison, commander of all coalition air operations, leaned forward with the intensity of a laser. "Captain, you're asking us to believe that a single terrorist operative is planning to attack the most heavily defended installation in Afghanistan. What makes you think he has that capability?" "Ma'am, Scorpion has spent 18 months systematically gathering intelligence on our response procedures, defensive capabilities, and operational patterns. He's not planning a direct assault. He's planning something more sophisticated." "Such as?" Phoenix moved to the tactical display, calling up satellite imagery of Bagram's massive complex. "Ma'am, Bagram processes hundreds of aircraft movements daily, thousands of personnel, and serves as the logistics hub for the entire theater. It's not a fortress, it's a functioning military city with all the vulnerabilities that implies." "Explain." "Scorpion doesn't need to fight his way through our perimeter defenses if he can find another way inside. Supply convoys, contractor personnel, even captured American uniforms and equipment could provide access. Once inside, a small team with the right intelligence could cause catastrophic damage." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Bagram's strength, its size and complexity, could also be its greatest weakness if Scorpion had found a way to exploit the inevitable security gaps in such a massive operation. General Morrison studied the display for a long moment before speaking. "Captain, assuming your analysis is correct, what do you recommend?" Phoenix took a breath, knowing that her next words would either validate everything she'd worked for or end her career in spectacular fashion. "Ma'am, I recommend we let him try." The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and predictable. Phoenix weathered the storm of objections and accusations with the patience of someone who had spent her career swimming upstream against conventional wisdom. "Let me explain," she continued when the noise subsided. "Scorpion's greatest advantage is that he chooses when and where to engage. He picks his battlegrounds, sets his terms, and vanishes before we can respond effectively. But if we can predict his target, we can turn that advantage against him." Harrison leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "You're talking about a trap." "Yes, sir. We let Scorpion think his intelligence gathering has been successful. We make Bagram appear vulnerable in exactly the ways his reconnaissance would suggest. And when he commits his forces to the attack, we close the net." "That's an enormous risk, Captain," General Morrison observed. "If you're wrong about his intentions or his capabilities, you're gambling with one of our most critical assets." "Ma'am, respectfully, we're already gambling. Scorpion has the initiative, and he's been using it to kill our people for 18 months. This gives us a chance to take that initiative back." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours, with Phoenix defending her analysis against some of the sharpest military minds in the coalition. But gradually, as the logic of her reasoning became clear, skepticism gave way to cautious acceptance. "All right, Captain," General Morrison finally said. "You've convinced us that the threat is real and your analysis is sound. The question now is implementation. How do we set this trap without actually compromising Bagram's security?" Phoenix smiled for the first time since entering the briefing room. "Ma'am, that's where it gets interesting. We don't actually compromise Bagram's security. We just make it appear that way to anyone conducting external reconnaissance." Over the next 2 hours, Phoenix outlined an operational plan that was part theater, part military deception, and part carefully orchestrated invitation to disaster. They would stage apparent vulnerabilities in Bagram's security while actually reinforcing it with concealed assets. Aircraft movements would be adjusted to create apparent windows of opportunity, while hidden defenses were positioned to exploit any attack attempt. "The key," Phoenix explained, "is making everything look routine from the outside while actually creating the most sophisticated kill zone in military history. Scorpion thinks he's been studying us, but we're going to teach him that sometimes the student becomes the target." When the briefing finally ended, Phoenix found herself alone with Harrison and General Morrison in the secure conference room. The weight of what they'd just committed to hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Captain," Morrison said quietly, "you understand that if this goes wrong, it won't just be your career that's over. We could lose thousands of personnel and compromise the entire Afghan operation." "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "And you still believe this is the right approach?" Phoenix looked out the reinforced window at the mountains that surrounded Kabul, thinking of all the American soldiers who had died in those peaks, while Scorpion played his deadly game of cat and mouse. "Ma'am, Scorpion has been dictating the terms of this conflict for 18 months. It's time we reminded him that we didn't get this far by playing defense." Harrison nodded slowly. "All right, Phoenix. You've got 48 hours to refine the operational plan. After that, we implement Operation Phoenix Fire." "Phoenix Fire, sir." "After you, Captain. After all, you're the one rising from the ashes of 18 months of defeat to give us our first real shot at victory." As Phoenix left the headquarters building, she felt the mountain air hit her face like a benediction. Somewhere in those peaks, Scorpion was planning what he believed would be his masterpiece, but he was about to discover that the Americans had been doing some planning of their own. The hunt was about to become a trap, and Phoenix intended to be the one who sprung it. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of planning sessions, equipment checks, and the kind of detailed preparation that separated successful operations from glorious failures. Phoenix found herself at the center of an intelligence hurricane, coordinating with assets ranging from satellite reconnaissance to human intelligence networks that had been tracking Scorpion's movements for months. The plan that emerged was elegant in its complexity. Bagram's apparent security vulnerabilities would be created through carefully orchestrated changes in patrol patterns, aircraft movements, and perimeter monitoring. But each apparent weakness would actually be a carefully prepared killing ground, with concealed assets positioned to exploit any attack attempt. The beauty of it, Phoenix explained to her assembled team of pilots, special operators, and intelligence specialists, is that Scorpion's own intelligence gathering works against him. He thinks he knows our patterns, our capabilities, our limitations. We're going to use that confidence to destroy him. Master Sergeant Kowalski, who had become one of Phoenix's most enthusiastic supporters, raised a tactical concern. "Captain, what if Scorpion smells a trap? He survived this long by being paranoid about American capabilities." "That's why the deception has to be perfect," Phoenix replied. "Every false vulnerability has to be supported by genuine intelligence indicators. If Scorpion suspects were baiting him, he'll disappear back into the mountains, and we'll never get another chance like this." Lieutenant Colonel Chen nodded from her position at the planning table. "The timing has to be perfect, too. We need Scorpion to commit fully before he realizes what's happening. Once he's inside the kill zone, there can be no escape routes." Phoenix moved to the tactical display, highlighting the various phases of Operation Phoenix Fire. Phase 1 creates the apparent vulnerabilities through adjusted patrol schedules and staged equipment movements. Phase 2 involves intelligence assets confirming these vulnerabilities through channels we know Scorpion monitors. Phase 3 is the waiting game. We maintain the deception while Scorpion plans his attack. And Phase 4, Harrison asked from the back of the room. "Phase 4 is where we find out if I've been right about Scorpion's psychology," Phoenix replied. "Either he takes the bait and walks into our trap, or I've misread him completely and we're back to square one." The room fell quiet as everyone contemplated the implications. They were gambling everything on Phoenix's ability to understand the mind of a killer she'd never met, based on pattern analysis of attacks she'd only studied through after-action reports. "All right, people," Harrison announced. "We've got our plan. Now let's see if we can execute it without getting ourselves killed in the process." As the team dispersed to begin implementation, Phoenix found herself standing alone in the planning room, staring at the tactical display that showed Bagram Air Base in stark digital detail. Thousands of Americans lived and worked within that perimeter, trusting that their security was in capable hands. She just convinced those hands to deliberately weaken that security based on her psychological profile of a terrorist they'd never captured. If she was wrong, the blood of every casualty would be on her conscience for the rest of her life. But if she was right, Operation Phoenix Fire would end Scorpion's reign of terror and prove that sometimes the best defense was a perfectly executed offense. Phoenix keyed her radio, calling her Apache crew chief to begin pre-flight preparations. In 6 hours, Phase 1 would begin, and the deadliest game of psychological warfare in the Afghan theater would commence. Somewhere in the mountains, Scorpion was planning what he believed would be his greatest victory. Phoenix intended to make sure it became his final defeat. Phase 1 of Operation Phoenix Fire began at 600 hours with the kind of subtle adjustments that only a trained observer would notice. Patrol schedules shifted by 15 minutes here, aircraft movements adjusted by 30 minutes there. To casual observation, Bagram's operations appeared normal. To someone studying the base's patterns with malicious intent, vulnerabilities were beginning to emerge. Phoenix spent the first day coordinating the deception from Bagram's operations center, watching as her carefully planned modifications created what appeared to be exploitable gaps in the base's security. Each change was designed to look like routine operational adjustment while actually creating the illusion of opportunity. Phase 1 modifications complete, reported Major David Shadowbox Williams, the intelligence officer coordinating the deception operation. Apparent security gaps are in place and being maintained according to schedule. Phoenix studied the tactical display, noting how the adjusted patterns created windows that would appear vulnerable to external observation. Any indication of hostile surveillance? Negative, but that doesn't mean Scorpion isn't watching. His intelligence network has been sophisticated enough to track our operational patterns for 18 months. If he's monitoring, he's doing it from positions we haven't identified. That's what we're counting on, Phoenix replied. The deception only works if he believes it's genuine. Phase 2 began 12 hours later with carefully crafted intelligence reports fed through channels known to be compromised. False maintenance schedules suggesting aircraft downtime. Fabricated personnel reports indicating reduced security manning. Staged communications describing logistical challenges that would strain defensive capabilities. It's like writing a love letter to a serial killer, observed Colonel Chen during one of their coordination meetings. We're essentially inviting him to attack us. That's exactly what we're doing, Phoenix acknowledged. But we're doing it on our terms in a place of our choosing, with every advantage stacked in our favor. Harrison reviewed the intelligence package being fed through compromised channels. How confident are we that Scorpion will receive this information? Based on previous operations, his intelligence network has access to at least 3 of the channels we're using, Williams reported. If he's planning something significant, he'll be monitoring all available intelligence sources. Phoenix felt the familiar tension that preceded major operations settling into her shoulders like an old friend. Phase 3 begins tomorrow. That's when we find out if Scorpion is as predictable as I think he is. Phase 3 was the waiting game, the period when they maintained their deception while Scorpion presumably planned his response. For Phoenix, it meant hours of studying intelligence reports, weather patterns, and terrain analysis, looking for any indication that their trap was working. On the second day of Phase 3, the first sign came through signals intelligence. Increased communications traffic in the mountain regions where Scorpion was known to operate. Not enough to pinpoint his location, but sufficient to suggest heightened activity. Could be routine, Williams cautioned during their morning briefing, or it could mean our bait is working. Either way, we maintain the deception, Phoenix decided. If Scorpion is planning something, he'll need time to position assets and coordinate timing. We stay patient and keep the illusion alive. But patience had never been Phoenix's strongest virtue, especially when American lives were at stake. She found herself spending more time in her Apache, conducting reconnaissance flights that served no tactical purpose beyond keeping her in the air where she felt most comfortable. On one such flight, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks on a mountain road that should have been impassable for heavy vehicles. The tracks led toward Bagram's general direction, before disappearing onto rocky ground that wouldn't hold impressions. "Control, Phoenix," she transmitted, her voice tight with suppressed urgency. "I'm observing fresh vehicle sign on Mountain Road 77 Charlie. Tracks suggest heavy transport recently used." Harrison's voice came back immediately. "Phoenix, investigate but maintain safe distance. Do not engage without explicit authorization." Phoenix banked toward the track location, her Apache's sensors painting the terrain in stark digital detail. The tracks were definitely recent, probably within the last 24 hours. heavy vehicles, possibly trucks capable of carrying significant personnel or equipment. As she followed the trail from altitude, Phoenix felt puzzle pieces clicking together in her mind. Scorpion wasn't just planning an attack on Bagram. He was positioning assets for a coordinated assault that would require more than just intelligence and improvised explosives. Control, Phoenix. Track analysis suggests multiple heavy vehicles, probably trucks, moving toward grid positions that would provide staging areas for Bagram approach routes. Phoenix, return to base immediately. Do not pursue further. But Phoenix was already seeing the larger picture, the operational geometry that would allow Scorpion to turn his months of intelligence gathering into a devastating attack. The truck tracks weren't random. They were part of a coordinated movement designed to position assault elements at multiple points around Bagram's perimeter. Control, Phoenix. I'm seeing indicators of a multi-axis attack being prepared. This isn't a single infiltration, it's a coordinated assault. The radio was quiet for long seconds before Harrison's voice returned, carrying the weight of command decision that could affect thousands of lives. Phoenix, all stations, all stations. Operation Phoenix Fire moves to Phase 4 immediately. All assets to battle stations. This is not a drill. As Phoenix banked her Apache toward Bagram, she felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that preceded combat. They'd set their trap, and Scorpion was moving into position to spring it. But Phoenix knew better than most that in warfare, the line between predator and prey could shift in the space of a heartbeat. The hunt was about to become a battle, and the mountains of Afghanistan were about to witness a confrontation that would determine whether American forces could adapt fast enough to defeat an enemy who had been studying their every move for 18 months. Phoenix pushed her Apache to maximum speed, racing back to Bagram as the largest and most complex military operation of her career moved into its final, deadly phase.